Hello and welcome to the Undercurrent Stories podcast, where we dive deep into the world one fascinating guest at a time. Today's guest is a British-born radio and television presenter who I got talking to when I was in the music bar in Stockholm in December. He has worked for radio and TV stations in Sweden since the 1980s. He was host of Night Flight Scandinavia and Top Gear Nordic, two programmes featuring music, fashion, culture, current events and comedy. He was also involved in the show Fame Factory, and he was the CEO of the International Polar Music Prize, and he did that from 2001 to 2004. So my special guest today is Stuart Ward. Hello and welcome to the show, Stuart.
Hello, Bob. Well, thank you for that lovely introduction. I'm honoured and privileged to join the ranks of all the fascinating and very impressive guests that you've had on your podcast. And this is actually my first podcast ever.
Well, I'm really delighted to hear that. I mean, for somebody who I was actually watching some of your shows that came from the early 90s on YouTube, and for somebody who's been doing presenting for such a long time, I think it's great that you're doing a podcast.
Well, thank you very much. And I hope people go to the YouTube channel. It's called Stuart Ward Top Gear. Of course, it has nothing to do with the Top Gear Jeremy Clarkson a bit on cars and motoring. It's definitely music. Actually, I stole the name from John Peel. When Radio 1 started back at the end of the 60s, John Peel had I think it was Saturday afternoons. It was a while ago now, but my memory sometimes falters. But I'm pretty sure it was Saturday afternoons. John Peel and Pete Drummond or Hammond. There were two of them.
Oh, Pete Drummond. Yes.
Hosting the Top Gear. It was more like indie alternative music, and but I thought it was a great name for a music program, a music show. Top Gear, going into top gear with the music and everything. So I stole it basically, and that's how the name arose when I did those TV shows.
I must admit, the car thing rings a bit of a bell, because I remember a week or so ago I was watching it, and there was a car there, and was that you in the car?
Yes, that was the, do we say vignette in English? The starting film that you have, the intro to a in this case, TV show every week. And part of it, yes, was me driving my Peugeot 205 that I had in those days. Yeah. Yes, so it was my car and me sitting there in it, yeah.
Well, it was great to meet you when I was in Stockholm, and it was quite by chance. We were watching our mutual friend, Quint Starkey.
Yes.
And I just thought, I struck up a conversation with you at the bar while we were watching him.
As we were leaning on the bar.
Yeah, we were. I remember that actually. And I'd just come in. I was quite tired. I been up since about 2 a.m. with flights and stuff. And we had such a show. Thank you. Such a fascinating conversation. I thought, I've got to get you on the show because, I mean, you've got so much experience. And I'd like today, if that's okay, to talk about the music industry. But first of all, before we do that, could we just talk a little bit about your life's journey, how you got into the music industry, and specifically how you ended up in Sweden? And by the way, I will just say your Swedish language is fantastic. I think anybody watching that program would not know that you're English.
Thank you, Bob, very much. Well, that's very kind of you. Whenever I get this question, it's so difficult to know. It can take hours to talk about. I'm 77 years old now, so I've had a long and very rich, and still have a rich life. But so it's real difficult to pick out the most important bits of my. And again, it sounds like I'm boasting. I suppose I am, and being very egotistical that I have had a kind of a unique life. It's not comparable to many other people's lives, really. I grew up in a working class home on a council estate in Exeter, and as a young boy, I got very interested in music. I used to listen to the pirate ships, Radio Caroline and Radio London, where my favorite DJs became primarily Kenny Everett. And Tony Blackburn, I did like too. I know that a lot of people think he's so corny, or was. And of course, that became, when they banned those, the BBC changed its format and created, amongst other things, Radio 1, which I was an very avid listener to. So music was a big thing for me growing up, apart from politics. And I and later on, when I actually ended up in the music industry, all my relatives in the UK said, Stuart, we're not a bit surprised that you've ended up in the music industry. We remember so well, you knew there was only one chart then. You knew all the chart positions. You knew the artist. You knew the song. But not only that, you knew the record labels that they roll on. And it's true. I had this sort of kink to know the record labels as well. And I remember that I did have a record label, particularly that I was a bit partial to, because it was such a beautiful label, and that was the Pye label. And I still have some vinyl singles of with the Pye label on. So I also got interested in politics very young. I joined the Labour Party when I was like 15. And became very active there. And in the Labour Party in those days, maybe still, I don't know, when we were talking in terms of social reforms, we were always talking in terms of Sweden being our role model. We will do as Sweden. And in fact, from that time, the Harold Wilson government of the 60s created something called the Ombudsman, which I think you still have in the UK, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and that is a Swedish word, of course. It comes the Swedish idea of an ombudsman. There are ombudsmen in Sweden in all kinds of walks of life. So I thought, when I finished all my studies, I'm getting out into working life, I've got to go to Sweden to see what makes it tick for myself. If it is this fantastic place that we also admire so much. Well, all these years later, here I am. So it can't have been so bad. And I met the love of my life. I came in January 73. Did articles against all the odds and became a chartered accountant. Came with Price Waterhouse in January 73 to Sweden and managed to get a position at the Stockholm office. Met the love of my life, as I say, in the January of that year. I am gay, and we are still together, almost 53 years on.
Wow.
And of course, I never lost my interest in music. And at the end of the 70s, something was created in Sweden, local community radio. There was no commercial radio, commercial TV then. And the public broadcasters, Sveriges Television, SVT, and Sveriges Radio, SR on the radio side, were kind of not doing the shows. They were playing music, popular music, but maybe the formats and the shows that they were doing were not really of interest for younger people. And so many of us who were younger then too used this local community radio to do music, pop music shows with a lot of tempo and jingles and sound effects and all the rest of it. I would do something like that, for example, and I would have Nigel as my duck, and so it was radio, so nobody saw what they actually were.
That's very 70s.
Yes, it can sound really twee today, I suppose, but it became popular. My shows became popular, and lots of the other shows obviously became popular too.
Could we just rewind a little bit? So, at what point did you decide that you were going to be a presenter or a DJ?
It happened accidentally. I mean, as a teenager, I listened apart from Radio 1 and the pirate ships first on Radio 1 and Radio Luxembourg, of course, and I would go to sleep to Radio Luxembourg on my Perdio transistor radio. There was always this interest, and even I tested once DJing with my little gramophone player that I had, and thought I was recorded and send it to Radio Luxembourg to see if they'd take me on. It never got that far. So I had these desires and inklings and dreams of maybe being a radio DJ, not necessarily television, but a radio DJ, which were, when this local community radio started, I was on the board of the student union. Having moved to Sweden in 73, I actually moved back to the UK in 76 because I wanted to have a political career in the UK, I thought it would look good on my CV, my political CV, if I'd been in Sweden, within a Labour Party, that is. And so I became actually the prospective parliamentary candidate for Saffron Walden. as it was called.
Oh, in
the
Essex. Yeah,
constituency
yeah.
was called then.
Yeah.
Where, amongst others, Rab Butler, in the 50s, the deputy prime minister to Harold Macmillan, was the MP. Um, and and as time went on, my partner, my Swedish partner, was able to be in London with another subsidiary company of Peugeot in London, and so we could be together in London there. And he actually drove me to all the different meetings I went to become a prospective parliamentary candidate, because it wasn't in those days like it is today something that you were necessarily open about being homosexual.
Yeah.
And even not even in the Labour Party. So it was not a thing I made public or talked about. But so I started working in the constituency in Holford. I remember I was in a lot, which was part of the constituency at that time. But as time went on, and Börje, my partner, had to come back to Sweden because this was 1976. There was the oil crisis, the miners' strikes. It wasn't the best of times for the world economy, let alone the British one. And so, and the UK was a member of the EEC, as it was called at that time, that developed into the EU eventually, but Sweden wasn't, and so there wasn't the mobility of labour in the same way that you could automatically work as a Swede in the UK. So we had to go back, and I carried on, but I felt no, that I cannot be without him. And so I put love before a political career and moved back to Sweden at the beginning of 77. Worked at a subsidiary company for BP as an internal auditor. But then I thought, if I'm going to make my life now in Sweden, I should know a bit more about Sweden's history, politics, especially, of course, being interested in politics, and have some kind of Swedish education. So I enrolled at Stockholm University at the end of the 70s, read political science, amongst other things. And during that time became politically active, sat on the board of the Stockholm University Student Union. And the student union decided, when this local community radio had been created in 79, that we would do shows, we would do programs there, which we did. And and eventually I did these, as I say, more pop music shows, made the program, the shows that we did, popular. And that led me so eventually I got into the record industry because of that. And worked for the Warner subsidiary at the beginning of the 80s and into the mid 80s, then a Swedish record label that had just been started in the mid 80s. And then at the end of the 80s, as you said in your introduction, the satellite and cable television started up. And there were channels here in Sweden. I joined one or two of them, did my own shows or with others.
Sorry to interrupt, but how did it feel, and what did it feel like doing the change from a presenter on the radio, audio, and then suddenly going in front of cameras? How was that change? How did you sort of tackle that change?
Excellent question, Bob. An excellent question, because of course it's different altogether. I mean, you can pick your nose or anything when you're doing radio, but when it's television, you've got to be so aware of of how you look, and because you've got makeup on, you've got to do all the makeup before doing the actual show. The shows were live always, that I liked, as were my radio shows. I've never enjoyed doing things that are recorded. I always liked to live, to get that vibe of being live all the time, and if you made mistakes and stuff, you deal with them, and in fact, I thought that could add to the charm of it if there were mistakes made with the viewers or with the listeners. But yes, it was a big, you had to adapt to, and the major thing for me with TV vis-a-vis radio was the technical side. That, sometimes I would say, "Oh, isn't it better if I stand over there in the studio and talk?" No, because we haven't arranged the lighting there or whatever, So there are all these technical aspects. It was more rigid. TV was much more rigid than radio. With radio, as I say, you can be much more flexible and just throw something in at any time, and nobody knows the difference, sort of thing. And so basically, I don't know if you remember and if the listeners remember the
Yes.
Monty Python's Flying Circus, which I was an avid fan of, and got to know actually Graham Chapman from Monty Python very well
Oh,
through the
right.
gay world.
Yeah.
In fact, I can boast that he picked me up at the King William pub in Hampstead one evening, and that's how we became good friends. And they had a sketch. I interviewed John Cleese as well when I got into TV and radio later. That's another story. Who is, of course, from Weston-super-Mare, which I hadn't read up on in advance. It came out in our interview that John Cleese is from Weston-super-Mare. So we're both from the West Country. So we had that in common. But yeah, Monty Python's Flying Circus had this sketch of a chartered accountant, which I was, sitting there over his figures and accounts and looking up, daydreaming, and thinking, oh, wouldn't it be so much more fun to be a lion tamer or a brain surgeon or something other than being a chartered accountant? Well, I became a radio DJ.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I've watched a few programs on the TV programs, and it conjures up my memories of the early 90s with big hair bands, and I thought you were coming across as a very natural entertainer, presenter. And I think you sort of epitomised what a lot of the presenters were like at that time, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I had an experience once where a very experienced and professional cameraman, when we did interviews with visiting artists and celebrities for those Top Gear shows, and one of they were all freelancers, so there's different sound people and different camera people, but one of them who'd been with me a few times, he says something which went straight into my heart. That, Stuart, I do these sort of interviews with different people so many times, but you're the only one that I feel anyway, that you get a really intimate contact with your victims in inverted commas. You're the only one that gets that contact with them somehow and gets them to really open up and talk maybe about things they wouldn't do with many others. And that, I, of course, took as an amazing compliment. But I did feel like that too, in many ways. That I was getting a lot from the different people that I've interviewed. That I more than perhaps I'd expected or was looking for. And I think it's because, for some reason, I've never been starstruck. I've never, or at least if I've been, I've not let them see it or feel it.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, one of my next questions actually was about some of those interviews. And you interviewed a lot of people. And what, if you'd just like to sort of talk about a couple of them, perhaps, 2 or 3 of them, what resounding memories do you have of specific people that you'd like listeners to hear about?
Well, this is also a difficult one because as you say, I've never counted them. And of course, it ended up that I've interviewed, I've met, I've worked with, I've interviewed, and sometimes become friends with so many of these really famous people, both Swedes, of course, Swedes too, which mean nothing, unfortunately, for many of your listeners, but on the international side, definitely so. So it's really hard to when I have to go think about it, and ahead of doing this podcast, I looked back a little bit at some of my stuff, my paperwork and stuff, but it even overwhelms me, to be honest with you. Yeah. But okay, and so what I was going to get to was that it ended up that I didn't just do music people. I did people from the world of film. I met Pelé, the football player, for example, and Björn Borg, the Swedish tennis player. When he moved home from his tax exile in Monaco, Monte Carlo, I built up his record collection for him.
Oh wow!
And so there were all these others that had nothing to do with the music world at all, really. And one of the interviews that really does stand out, one of the individuals that really does stand out, is not a music person, but it is Barry Humphries, Dame Edna.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And yes, who was a real dandy, a real connoisseur, who was not homosexual, of course, doing, even though he did Dame Edna so damn well. And it was so funny. And of course, the interview became very funny as well at times. And he starts out by saying, for example, when I'm working at the point, well, you're welcome to, Stuart, to my luxury penthouse suite where we are sitting right now, aren't we? And I'm having to say, we were in this like cupboard where all the brooms and the buckets and things for the cleaners were to get good acoustics.
Oh, right, yeah.
And he's telling that do you remember? I hope many of your listeners will also remember Roxette.
Yes,
you know, the Swedish duo.
yeah.
The Look. They broke their big hit was the Look, and they did. It's from the film Pretty Woman, right, with Richard Gere and Julia Roberts. It must have been Love that they did. Yeah. So. And he'd met them. I was meeting him in Gothenburg, Sweden's second city, and he'd been in Stockholm beforehand. And there's this beautiful archipelago. I don't know if have you been there and seen the archipelago outside Stockholm? It's fantastic. I think it's
from
like
a distance. Yeah, from a distance.
Yeah, it's like there's 32 or 35,000 islands dotted around. Some you can't even stand on, of course, because they're so small. But he'd been there to some nice island and seen this really nice place, and he said, and one of those Roxettes has such a lovely house there, Stuart. Oh, but I shouldn't be talking about this, should I? Because in Sweden he said this Swedish name Jantelagen, which is like the royal Swedish envy, if you like. And I asked him actually, Damon, how did you know about that royal Swedish and the Swedish word for it? He said, Stuart, wherever I go in the world, I want to know about the place I'm in, and if I don't already know about it, if I've never been there before, especially, I ask the taxi drivers. Because they know all the gossip, they know all the scandals. You'll get everything from them that you need to know.
And what's that word, Stuart?
Jantelagen.
And could you just explain it again, please?
Log is law.
Yeah.
And so Jante is like being a commoner in a way, to find some sort of good. I've never had to think about a translation for it. I've just adapted it and adopted it being a Swedish word. But that was the word that he picked up or got from some taxi driver.
Yeah. And in what context would you use it again?
Well, because there perhaps is envy. I think we've had this a bit in the UK, certainly when I grew up, that we were, those of us who wanted a more fairer society were accused of being envious and jealous.
Well, sort of like an inverted snobbery.
Yes, in a way, but not exactly.
No.
Not exactly, Bob, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Maybe it is a specifically Swedish thing, but I could relate to what I could be accused of growing up in the UK sometimes on the political front, for example, where because I mean you've been to Sweden, so and you'll know a little bit of its history, that there's always been this idea of fairness and equality, which is one of the things that appealed to me about Sweden, of course, and does to this very day. And so, but then you could be accused of this envy, that you're envious of those who have more than you do, or are richer than you, or all the rest of it.
Yeah.
So that was and Barry Humphries, being this connoisseur and dandy, as I mentioned, afterwards he said, Stuart, I'm going to be in Gothenburg for a few days now. Can you recommend me things to do and see here? And so one of the obvious things was the Opera House there, because it was designed by the same architect as the Sydney Opera House, which was, of course, a perfect coincidence. But also, I gave him the names of some restaurants that I would go to.
Yeah.
And this was before mobile phones. Mobile phones were just starting at the time. This was 1994. I get home, so I didn't have I didn't have a mobile phone yet. I get home from a day at the studio, the radio studio, the radio station that I was working for then, and I get home and my answer, we had the answering machines, and it would flash when you had messages. So I put on to listen to my messages. And the first message on there is from Barry Humphries, thanking me for all the tips and the recommendations that I gave him. Because he was going to go on to Dubai, of all places. I thought about that. in Dubai, do they really get Barry Humphries and Dame Edna? It was like I thought he's going to the Middle East for a tour in the Middle East. But anyway, before leaving, he left me that lovely message thanking me, and I thought, wow, isn't that something?
Yeah.
He wouldn't necessarily feel that he would need to do a thing like that.
No. Did you ever meet somebody like Paul McCartney?
Yes, I have met Paul McCartney a couple of times, actually. Once when I interviewed him, he started interviewing me because he could hear I wasn't Swedish. And he started, and he was such a modest, humble person, like this is a legend I'm talking, and he's asking me, interviewing me. And they told me in advance of the interview, Stuart, you got 15 minutes. Make sure you get out of those 15 minutes what you need. And like, almost 10 minutes anyway, if not 10 minutes, had already gone with him interviewing me. So I had to really get a move on to get what I wanted.
And this was on live TV, was it?
No, this was recorded.
Oh, okay.
And of course, we took part of that interview where he's saying, because I got him to do a jingle or an ID for Top Gear, where he says, "Hi, this is Paul McCartney, and you're watching Top Gear," and he points his finger to the camera. And so we've taken that where you can see, because there's music going in the background, you don't hear him actually saying it in the intro to the show, but you can, you can see that he's saying Top Gear.
Yes. So when you had just on your interviewing technique, Stuart, because I can tell you're very, very natural with people, but how much preparation would you do when you knew you had somebody coming along to interview who was pretty famous? How much prep did you do?
Yeah. Before that, I must say something about Paul McCartney, Bob. Yeah. It could be good for before I answer that question, be good for the listeners to know. The man is so humble and so nice that at that time, anyway, he's much older now, but at that time, his music publishers, he would visit his music publishers around the world incognito, unannounced until like the day before, so they could prepare a little bit, and also get people together that the music publishers felt it would be interesting for Paul to meet at their offices. So it was no big deal made. There was no interviews, no PR or anything like that. And I was called the day before to say, they told me that they wouldn't tell me who it was. But it turns out that I'd done an interview in a music magazine, an international music magazine, where one of the people I named as an idol, as someone I really respected and admired, was Paul McCartney. Because of that, they saw that, and so that's why I was invited to meet him, just naturally.
Yes.
And the same thing. He was just a natural person. So I think, but to do a thing like that, to just go around the world to thank. Yeah. Partly the people at his music publishers and record companies, and then those of us who like journalists or TV show hosts or radio show hosts or whatever, to thank us for the work we were doing on his behalf. I mean, isn't that a fantastic thing? To get to your question, I put a hell of a lot of work into to my interviews, whether they were for radio or for TV. I really dug deep and tried to inform myself. Of course, with many, a lot already. I mean, somebody like Paul McCartney, a fair.
And this was before Google, of course.
And yes, absolutely. It was much before all of that. Yeah.
So that must have been quite tough. So you must have spoken to a lot of people, I guess.
I spoke, but you could find things anyway without Google and without the internet. But yeah, you just basically had to do your homework in a completely different way. And I wanted to know that I felt I could feel confident in going to that place where I'm going to do the interview, to feel confident enough to do it, because you never know how they're gonna deal with you either, and test you.
Yes. And you get the odd interview where no matter how many questions you've prepared, quite rightly, the conversation goes in a different way and you rarely touch some of those questions.
Exactly. And in fact, I think generally speaking, that's the way it was, that once you get into it and you get that, is the word repartee? Yeah, it is, right?
Yeah.
You get that repartee with that contact with each other.
Yeah.
Thanks to this podcast, and a lot of my English words are coming back into my head, Bob.
Oh, well, that's good.
Which I don't use otherwise, don't use very often. And so it develops in its own way, and things come up, of course, that you hadn't read up on, that you hadn't learned in advance, that weren't noted anywhere, or for whatever reason you missed them. But it was doing this thing of not showing having respect, of course, but not this starstruck thing
No.
that we talked about earlier. I think not at least showing that, and just talking as like two friends.
Yes.
I try to
Yes.
get it to bring it down to that level of being two friends. As a kid, I had no self-confidence whatsoever. No self-confidence whatsoever. It's something that has come about during my mature years. And of course, the work that I've done in show business, music and show business, definitely has contributed to me having a completely different level of self-confidence today to what I had when I was younger.
Do you miss the presenting side of things?
Yes. Oh,
Well, it's
very
never
much.
too late.
I don't. I doubt it.
Well, Tony Blackburn's still on the radio, on Radio 2 on a
Yes, I
Saturday.
know.
Yeah.
I've got this book that they published with him. I was sent it by my cousin. I've got a cousin in the UK down in Honiton, and he knows that I was a big fan of Tony Blackburn, so he sent me this book, Tony Blackburn. They published a few years ago. Yeah, I mean, sure, and who knows? I miss it. I would love to do that sort of thing again. I would be a bit rusty today, of course. But I am a bit critical sometimes of what I hear and see. I think things in Sweden anyway have become very formatted and very strict and not natural. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't feel today with people who are presenters on the TV and radio. It's also scripted and and managed. There's not any room for what's the word I'm looking for? Being spontaneous.
Yes. Yeah.
There's just not the room in the same way. In my day, we didn't have scripts, and when it came to the interviews, I would just have key words or whatever, key events that I would want to raise. But I learned eventually, of course, having done so many, that, you can rely on the thing developing. And I wanted to try to find those key events or words or times for the person that I'm interviewing or the people that I'm interviewing that I know somehow I realize were very key in their lives and in their careers. And that would spark off so much more,
Yeah. Well, that's a good segue to my next question, actually.
Okay.
Yes, it worked very well because I've got this written down as a bullet point.
It's on me.
I'd love to hear how you got into. First of all, tell us a bit about the Polar Music Prize, because Quint mentioned it to me and I'd heard of it, but I didn't realise how important it was. And obviously, you were CEO there for several years.
Yes, 4 years. 4 years.
So, first of all, how did you get into that?
Also an interesting question. Well, after the TV and radio shows, I became, and I worked for another record company, Stockholm Records, for a while. But then I became the managing director, CEO of something called Export Music Sweden, because it was. Can I just say, and as related to that, the Top Gear show that we have been talking a fair bit about, the whole idea of that show was I had a lot of international artists, as you've probably seen, but they were recorded. We did have I remember Sydney Youngblood, if that says anything to you, or Sonia. They were live in the studio amongst the international artists, but the majority were recorded that we also put into those TV shows. But so the main idea of the Top Gear show was, at that time, Swedish television was terrible. I don't think it's that much better today at giving new up-and-coming Swedish artists the chance to show what they've got, what they can do. If they didn't have a name already, they didn't have a chance on appearing in any way on Swedish television, except once a year in the Swedish heats of the Eurovision Song Contest. Then you could possibly have a chance. But, that's nothing. So the idea of the Top Gear show was to give all these fantastic talents that there were then and still are today in Sweden the chance to show their mettle
Yes.
and what the Swedish people had in their own country, because there was talking about self-confidence, they lacked it totally here, and the Swedish artists lacked self-confidence totally. Who are we to think we are anything, in the big world of music? Well, we all know today how wrong they were, right? And so that was kind of a very good thing for me to become the managing director of this Export Music Sweden, which still exists. It's a music industry organization supported by all the different other music industry organizations like the Performing Rights Society, like FP, and so on and so forth, to promote at an industry level Swedish primarily popular music internationally. And so there used to be a big music trade fair in Cannes, where the film festival is held in May. At the end of January, the equivalent in the music industry, Midem, as it was called, it doesn't exist anymore in this day of downloading and so on. At the end of January every year, we had this big Midem, and we sponsored the inaugural night party in 1999 with the theme "Cool Sweden" as a further way of telling the world, look, there's all this fantastic music, all these fantastic creators, songwriters, producers, DJs here in Sweden. Tap onto it, for goodness sake. And so in 1999, Marie Ledin, the daughter of the man who created ABBA, and who also created the Polar Music Prize, Stig Andersen. Stig Andersen is what's the name? His nickname was Stickan Andersen.
Yeah.
He was a big man, but he became a big name because he wrote a lot of or did lyrics to a lot of very, very popular Swedish songs. Either they were covers of international songs that he put lyrics to, or the songs themselves, and that's how he made a big name for himself and started. But he was also a very astute businessman. His music publishing company, Sweden Music, they took on a lot of catalogs, international catalogs, and distributed in Sweden. He made a lot of money from those too. So, and he was the man who put ABBA together.
Yeah.
That in itself, I think, is a big claim to fame.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and Stig, he saw these different music prizes in the world, and he missed one that brought together the different worlds of music, because he had himself suffered a lot from, if you like, the snobbery of those, let's say it as it is, the classical music world. That there's been this snobbery, and maybe it still exists today. I don't know, but certainly was, and in Sweden too, where he wanted to do what he could to fight against snobbery in music, because music is in the ears of the appreciator, whatever kind of music it is, and it's so destructive to be against each other purely because we don't like the same kind of music. So he wanted to bring the different worlds of music together and created the Polar Music Prize to do just that. And his daughter, a well-known person in the music industry here, she's had her own record companies, amongst other things, even a book publishing operation, Marie. She asked me in 1999 or 1970, possibly it was, if I would be interested in taking over and becoming the MD or the CEO of the Polar Music Prize. And of course, that was something I absolutely couldn't resist, because it was, at that time anyway, a real institution and very highly respected. And I did feel that there are certain things about it that we could work with. Primarily getting it more known internationally, because it's an international music prize, but it wasn't really very well known internationally. It does take time to build things up, of course, but that was my ambition, which Marie, of course, and the board at that time also agreed with and liked. Well, then we'll see if we carry on talking about what actually happened, if you like, but I'll leave that to you.
Yeah, so I mean, did that was that a full-time job for you? Had you left presenting
Oh
by that time?
yes, I had
Yeah.
left the Export Music Sweden job, and it was definitely a full-time job, and more and more. Stig donated the prize, the funding, the actual fund that was created for the prize and for the prizes that were awarded every year. He wanted, you see, the Polar Music Prize to also to be seen as a kind of Nobel Prize for music.
Yes.
Equivalent, but in music, because there isn't one for music, of course, as we know. So he wanted it to have that same sort of status, and so he donated the money to a Royal Academy, the Royal Swedish Academy of Music, where all those cultural snobs were. I had to get that said as well during this podcast. I worked from the offices of the Royal Swedish Academy of Music as well. And that also helped get the situation whereby the King of Sweden presents the prize every year, in the same way that he does the Nobel Prizes that are presented in Stockholm. As you know, the Peace Prize is given in Norway, because when Alfred Nobel created the Nobel Prizes, Norway and Sweden were the same country, we're in a union. So that's why today the Peace Prize will be announced and awarded in Oslo in Norway, and all the others in Stockholm in Sweden.
So how did you set about deciding who was going to be nominated for a prize?
It wasn't actually me, you see. We had partly the board, but also we had a special committee, prize awards committee, that would decide. Because I can assure you, Bob, that if I'd had more say in the matter, which I tried to have, which was virtually impossible, because there's so many ego-tripping people apart from myself on both the board and the prize awards committee, that I wasn't given a say at all. I had to be independent and just do my job and get it out there in the public domain and create as much attention to it as possible.
Yes.
And make sure that it was a good prize award ceremony and banquet.
Did that involve a lot of travel overseas for you?
Yes, it did involve travel, a lot of travel, and so as I say, it was primarily the prize awards committee that decided on these things, and I did have quite a lot of problems working with the as I called them, the dinosaurs and the snobs of the Royal Swedish Academy of Music, who understood nothing about popular music, the world that Stig Andersen came from and that I came from whatsoever. That was very, very frustrating, to say the least.
It sounds like...
And yes, it did involve a lot of travel.
Yeah, it sounds like quite a challenge actually doing that, but I'm sure you managed all the politics very well.
I had to.
That's what you were there for.
That's what I was there for as well, partly anyway, yes. But we didn't at all have the prize winners that when it's safe to do so, I will maybe in another podcast let on a big secret, a big one that I don't feel I can say in public today. One of the biggest mistakes that was made during my 4 years there. Like I say, when what's the expression for that? When the statute of limitations, is over. At some time in the future, I will gossip about something that was a real terrible thing, mistake that was made.
Okay, well, that sounds like a whole podcast in itself, Stuart. You have a very, very interesting life in the music industry. Are you able to share any gossip?
There is a hell of a lot of it, Bob, to be honest. Could be the subject of another podcast. I don't know, as that will be up to you. But I think one piece of gossip that really sticks in my mind, it's several in a way, being gay. And, I wasn't such a bad looker, obviously, in my younger day. And there were 3 times in total that I can recall where female interviewees showed me that they were interested in us perhaps doing more than having an interview, if I put it diplomatically. And one was a Swedish singer whose name I would never tell because she's still very active in singing and everything. But there was one of them, I will say one of them was from the the Ritchie family, the disco group of the late 70s, the best disco in town
Oh,
was
yeah,
one
yeah.
of their
Yeah.
hits, and Brazil, one of the members of that group did her best. But then the one that was the biggest surprise to me, because she's really a woman of the world and she's been around and she's mixed in all kinds of circles, and you could never believe that she would make such a mistake to think that we could go to her hotel room afterwards and take a glass of wine together.
Hi, I'm Jane Fonda, and you're listening to Stuart Ward.
Jane Fonda. Wow.
Yes. Yeah. I've got hundreds of those jingles, by the way, of all the people I've met during the years. But yes, and that's the one from Jane Fonda to prove I actually did meet her, that I'm not telling you lies now.
No.
And yeah, she suggested we go to the hotel room and have a glass of wine or something after. And like I said, I was taken aback because, she's a woman of the world and everything. Like, as I say, that I couldn't believe that she would not sense it.
Yeah. It sounds like I think we've got another podcast just with gossip and all those recordings. But so fast forward to today, then, Stuart. What do you? I mean, you're a very passionate person with life, so you obviously got lots going on. What are you into at the moment? What's cooking at the moment?
Well, very briefly, after the Polar Music Prize, I moved to Thailand, actually. And until a little bit more than 4 years ago, I lived there for 18 years.
Yeah.
And during that time, I worked for the Swedish Embassy in Bangkok, 12 years.
There's so much coming out. I didn't know that, Stuart. I mean, I know we had a brief chat the other day, but we didn't speak about that when I met you. I mean, this is a whole another episode.
I know. This is what I mean. I'm so blessed, and I'm not religious, but I will use the word blessed to it. I can't believe that I've had, and I'm still having, Bob. I'm thoroughly enjoying life at 77 years old, and it's just fantastic. And I'm going to make sure it continues this way forever, however much time I have left. And yeah, so and came back a bit more than 4 years ago. So I'm still kind of catching up on Sweden, actually, even though I never lost contact with it because my partner was there too. We both were working at the Swedish Embassy for a while. And so being at the Swedish Embassy, I didn't kind of lose contact with Sweden, if you like, either. So on returning, I got more active again into my political life, which I had abandoned for my music and entertainment career, of course. I couldn't do the both. And it wouldn't have been appropriate either to have done both during those years. So now I'm kind of felt free to pick up the political career again, this time in the Swedish equivalent to the Labour Party, the Social Democratic Party. And so now I'm very, very enveloped in that and things connected with that. And it is an election year this year in Sweden. So I'm very, very active right now and committed to, I'm doing a lot of canvassing, for example, talking about the Swedish being okay. I actually had an American lady on the door two evenings ago, so sometimes there's a means of using my English language where I'm knocking on doors where people want to speak English. And actually, a couple of years ago, I think it was, when we were doing some canvassing between elections, knocked on the door, and an Asian-looking lady opens the door, and I could tell she's not really understanding my Swedish very well. So she calls her lady friend who's in the kitchen in Thai, and to come to the door because she's not understanding what I'm saying. So I went over and started talking Thai with them, and they were looking absolutely, they were just taken aback, and they just couldn't fathom that this white, fair-haired, blue-eyed man is suddenly speaking their language. And it happened on the bus, actually, a couple of days ago. I'm sitting on the bus coming home from the city centre, and two ladies sit opposite me. And I could see they were Thais, and they start talking Thai with each other. So I interrupted their conversation, and we had a lovely conversation in Thai all the way home on the bus. And they were also like, people and the Swedes around, all the Swedish passengers around, and looking in amazement at what the hell are they doing? What is that's going on there?
You've obviously got an ability to be able to learn languages.
I've always been fascinated. I was top of my class in French at school. Okay. Got a school prize even in those days when we got school prizes. I've still got that book that I got as my school prize. Yeah, the thing is, Bob, it's also a question of this, that where if I'm in a place and I'm going to be there a long time, I don't want them talking about me behind my back. I want to know what they're saying about me in that case.
You could understand it. This has been a great conversation, Stuart. There is so much to what you've done and you've achieved in life and the people you've met. It's so inspiring. And I'm sort of thinking, if we've got anybody listening who thinks, I'd like to have a real zest for life, perhaps missing out on one or two things, what's your advice for them?
That's also a very good question. But you're good at these good questions, aren't you? I've heard some of your other podcasts. You really get things out of people that the thing we were talking about earlier that otherwise wouldn't come through and are so fascinating to listen to.
Oh, thank you.
No, but seriously, I say that from my heart. I think the zest comes from seeing the opportunities and what life has to offer you, having been born and brought up in an environment that wasn't very promising, and been able to get out of that, and by believing in yourself, I suppose it is somewhere, even though I lack self-confidence, but believing in yourself, learning that, and seeing that, I am somebody too. I can contribute, positively. But to have this curiosity, I think that's a key word, to be curious about your fellow human beings, about others in other parts of the world, not just those that were immediately around you, but in other parts of the world as well, and in other fields than the field you yourself are in, or are going to be in, or would like to be in. Just to have a curiosity about life, about people.
Well, Stuart, it's been a fascinating conversation. Great to have you on the show and to learn so much about your life in the music industry. Thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thank you. And it's all been thanks to you and your questions and the way you've been dealing with this. So much appreciation from my side too.
Oh, thank you, Stuart.